That's a girl. That's a good girl. That's my sweetheart. That's my little girl. Good baby. Okay, let's go over here. Oh, yeah. Bring it here. Here we go. Come on, a little closer. We did it right. Well, I got started in high school in Corinth, Mississippi, when we had one of the best musicians to arrive in Corinth to start a band. We had at first he tested everybody in the school who thought they wanted to play an instrument, and the ones that passed most of the stuff, the ones that got the highest grades, he invited them down to his band room and said, what instrument do you want to play? And I said, well, I want to play the clarinet. And he said, well, where's your clarinet? And I told him, I don't have one. And he said, well, you got to have an instrument if you're going to play an instrument. And he said, can you get one? I said, you mean you want me to buy one? And he said, certainly, we don't have any owned by the schools, and I don't have any. I said, how much they cost? And he said, $150. That was in 1937, I think, somewhere along in there. And I said, well, my dad only makes $18 a week, so he'd never be able to buy a clarinet. And so Paul Page looked back at the back end of the room, and there was this great big thing with a bell about like on it, here on it, and he said, well, I've got this thing back here, and he said, if you would want to play that, he said, I'll give you free lessons. And I said, free lessons, my gosh, free music lessons? Boy, I ran back there to get up to that thing. It was up on a stand, and I just hopped up on that stand, and he had a stand for the sousaphone, it was called, named for the great band director, John Philip Sousa. And he had a stand for that, and there was this big thing called a mouthpiece. And he said, just blow on that and see what you think of it. And so I honked on that thing, and I've never looked back. I loved it. And so that's how I got started in music. And by the time I finished high school, I won the contest as the best tuba player in high school in the country. So this is my music room. And right now, my major instrument, the trombone, is over in John Thomas's shop, being worked on. I'll pick it up tomorrow. And so though I don't play the trumpet to amount to anything, I have this one here. It's a darn good one, a Getson. But I use it now while my trombone's over in Santa Cruz to shape up my embouchure so I can get higher notes. And as Marilyn says, you sure waste a lot of time down there. So you gotta, as a musician, you can't just take days off. If you take a day off, you're losing time. It's just like training dogs, as you told me many times. Got to do this at home. The piano over there is a gift from my son, Peter. He did very well in school, and he had a wonderful piano teacher. And so I was visiting one day when I was up here having judging a dog show, and he played for me, and I said, boy, I'm sure glad that he is doing that, because it'll do him good the rest of his life. Music will set you up to learn almost anything better than you would have if you didn't have music. I taught there for 14 years, and the reason I had all these instruments is that I never knew who they were going to have me teach. I went over there to teach the low brass, tuba, euphonium, trombone. And I get over there one morning, and Arlen said, he's the boss over there, he said, I appreciate it if you'd take a saxophone student today. And I said, well, to myself, I don't know anything about saxophone, but if it's a beginning student, she doesn't know anything either. So I got all these just to keep up one day ahead of all those students. Well, I played tuba for over 70 years now, and but when my best tuba student over there graduated, I sold him my last tuba, and I decided that I was going to play something else that wasn't quite so heavy, and I didn't have to haul it around in the back seat of my car, all the time. So that's how I got into the other instruments, and also, as I said, trying to stay one lesson ahead of the students over there. We had some darn good students, and it took a lot to stay ahead of them. And I go back over those every once in a while, and I laugh. It reminds me of every one of the students that I taught over there. So many people now are not playing the piano. It used to be every home you came into, there's a piano over there. And about half the people who would come in would go right to it and start playing. It was the same way in my grandmother's house in Corinth, and over in my aunt's house across the street. You seldom could be walking by those houses if somebody wasn't playing the piano. Maybe not well, but they liked it. Now, the piano builders are going out of business because you don't have to go to a piano to play. You can pull it up on your computer and play it. It's a shame, too. There are quite a few things that the computers have made obsolete. Toastmasters. Have you ever been to Toastmasters? I was probably sitting around talking too much, not listening enough, not having a real conversation, just talking. And finally, his wife, John Curtis, she said, have you ever been to Toastmasters, Joe? And I said, no, what's that? And she said, well, you're going with me tomorrow morning. She came, got me, and took me to my first Toastmasters meeting. And again, that's something that I never look back on. And went to the one at the Naval Postgraduate School because it met at noon and on Fridays. And it had just been a wonderful experience. They don't, people go to college and they want to learn how to speak in public. Some people have said that the most terrible thing is to have to get up and speak in public. It's worse than dying. I said, well, I wouldn't say that, but they go to college and they take this course, they get the credits, they still don't know how to speak. because they haven't had the experience that you get in Toastmasters. Toastmasters, you get up, you prepare a speech, it's timed, you've got to give it in 5 minutes or 6 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever the requirement is for the speech that you're giving. And then at the end, after you're spoken somewhere along in the program, the evaluators, they don't call them judges, they call them evaluators. They tell you what you should have done a little better, and they always tell you what you've done well. So you have those things to work on. And eventually, you're not afraid of speaking. You could talk to anybody. You learn something every time you go there. It's a good program. I've survived aviation. Yeah, during World War II, or as World War II started, I was just graduated from high school 3 months after Pearl Harbor, you know. And so I was still 17 years old. They wouldn't take you into the Navy until you were 18. And but I wanted to be a naval aviator. My brothers, both my brothers, were already aviators. I went over to Memphis from Corinth. I went over to Memphis with a whole bunch of other guys, and I told them that I wanted to be a naval aviator. I was the only one in the whole bunch that wanted to be a naval aviator, and so they said, "Well, Joe, you know, there are 3,000 people in the pipeline now to start pre-flight school and all these things that you have to do to be an aviator." He said, the best way for you to get into that ahead of the 3,000 people is to join the regular Navy, and from inside the Navy, then you make your application and you get ahead of them. I said, okay, I'll do that. I got on the Buchanan and we got underway and went straight to Guadalcanal. And Guadalcanal, the battles were about in the middle of the Guadalcanal campaign there. I was on the Buchanan then from there all the way to Tokyo. I was in the turkey shoot where with the carriers. The assignment for my ship that I liked the best was when we were working with the carriers, you know, people in Task Force 38 or Task Force 58, depending on which admiral had it. And but I was on that Buchanan from Guadalcanal to Tokyo with somebody shooting at me all the time. I survived that, and every 6 months, I would go over and take my physical for flight training, and they'd say, your orders will be here any day now. Well, that day didn't happen until the day the war was over. And we got an all-nav message. It said, all orders are hereby canceled. The war is over. My orders were to flight training. And they had come in the night before the war was over. And a young man, Harold Bisner, was the yeoman, which is the secretary for the captain. And he came down in our compartment, the C compartment where we slept, and he woke me up and he said, your orders came in. I said, they did. Boy, I was so happy. And he said, but they were canceled by the all-nav. I said, what do you mean it was canceled by the all-nav? And boy, I got up and got dressed, and I went right up and knocked on the captain's door, which was absolutely forbidden. The Marines would have shot me if they'd seen me. And the captain said, what do you want? And I said, my orders for flight training came in. He said, yeah, I saw them. And I said, but the all-nav says they're canceled. He said, don't worry about it. to myself, don't worry about it. I mean, Admiral King in Washington canceled those orders. And so when he got up and got dressed, and we were going along a merchant ship to refuel, and I'm the helmsman, and I'd been the helmsman for every refueling that I could remember. And the captain came up and said, "No, Joe," he said, "put chief's going to take us alongside." I said, "Well, why?" And he said, "Well, because we got to get you over to that ship. You'll never get to Pensacola if we don't get you over there right now." I said, "What did you do with those orders?" He said, "I backdated them to two days ago." And I said, "We didn't get any mail 2 days ago." He said, "It's fixed, Joe, just don't worry about it." But I got over there and I stayed on that ship till we got to Tokyo. And then we got to Tokyo. I said, the guy, we pulled up to the dock because this ship that I doing was a troop ship, and it had a lot of soldiers on it, the Army that was coming in to occupy Tokyo, Japan for the time. And so I said, "What do I do now?" And somebody said, I don't know, but if I were you, I'd go over there and get on a train or something and get down to Haneda, where the troops are coming in on C-54s, you know, the four-engine plane. So I got on this train. I didn't know, I didn't have a ticket. I didn't know anybody on the train. It was just full of Japanese people. I couldn't speak English. None of them speak English, you know. But they knew where I was going. They were as glad to get the war over as we were. We get down to the airport, and they told me to get off right here, and just about 2 blocks over there to the airport. I got over there and got on one of these C-54s, went to Guam, and I forget how. I got all the way to Pearl Harbor. I got to Hawaii, and they caught me there. They said, "You don't have any." You had to have certain points at that time to be able to get back to the U.S. where you could go home and so forth. But I didn't have enough points to do anything, and so they put me on the battleship Iowa that was going to San Diego, and that's where I got off and hitchhiked on my way all the way home, and then all the way to Pensacola. And I get to Pensacola, and they say, "Well, you haven't been to college yet." And I said, "I don't have to go to college to learn how to fly. I know enough about airplanes." And they said, "No, we can't have you in here." So they sent me to Muhlenberg in Allentown, Pennsylvania for college. And I went back and forth from Corpus Christi to Pensacola at least 5 times for qualifications and different airplanes and so forth. I thought I'd never get through. They have only the transport types that I have flown, but they start with the PBY, land and sea, the DC-3, the DC-4, the DC-6, DC-9, 4 types of DC-9, DC-9-10, DC-9, 10, 30, the 50, and the 80. So all those, and I don't know how many, I've got a logbook down there that it would take me a year to go through, but I've flown about, I'd say 50 different types of single engine airplanes. I wanted to be a commercial pilot, so you had to have 2,000 hours of flight time before you could get get their commercial license. So I'd fly anything. I'd just go down to operations, like at North Field in San Diego. I'd go down there and sit down in the operations room, and people would come in and say, "Well, what do you want?" I said, "I'm waiting for an airplane." And "What airplane?" I said, "Something to fly." And so more than likely every day that I went down there, I'd get an airplane to ferry to some. At that time, most of them were ferried over to Arizona for scrapping them, because we had so damn many of them, you know. But occasionally I'd get a TBM to take to Fort Worth, where they had been built, and they were selling the engines or something, putting them in other airplanes or something. Once or twice I got one to New York, to the airplanes that I like to fly best, which were F-8s and F-6s. And so I'd fly those to Islip in New York. That was just down the street from the factory. And but it was all fun. And I said, "No, you know, I'm going to stay in Hawaii. This is my second trip into Hawaii, and I'm going to stay here and live here." Because, you know, during the war, I hated the place because there was nothing but sailors everywhere. You could go down to Waikiki and you couldn't see another human being, just sailors. And I decided that I was safe for the moment, but you never know when another scrap's going to start, and they recall me to the Navy. So I'm getting out. So I got out of the Navy, went over to Hawaiian Airlines. In fact, I had 4 applications in for airlines. United, Transocean, Pan Am, and Hawaiian. And I got letters from all 3 of the United, Transocean, and Pan Am to come to San Francisco for an interview. I never heard from Hawaiian. So one day I'm coming back from downtown downtown shopping, or maybe to lunch or whatever it was. I said, "I'm going to stop in at Hawaiian and see what's going on with my application." And so I walked into what we called the White House then. And that was just where all the bosses, you know, the vice president, the president, and everybody had an office in there. And I walked in, and as soon as I walked in, this gal at the receptionist, she looks up at me and she says, "What do you want?" And I said, "Well, I came to find out about my application." She said, "We're not hiring." And I said, "I didn't ask you you're hiring. I wanted to know where my application was." She said, "I don't know where it is." So down the hall, last office in the hall, this old man came out in airline uniform. Old man came out, and he said, I was still in my Navy uniform, you know, and he said, "What do you want, Ensign?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to talk to this lady about my application." He said, "Come on back here." And he said, "You're still in the Navy, huh?" I said, "Yeah, I am, but I can get out if you'll hire." He said, "Sit down. What you flying in the Navy?" And I said, "PBYs." And I didn't tell him DC-3s also, you know. So I said, "PBYs?" And he said, "The hell you are." He said, I was the first flying boat sailor in the Navy, pilot in the Navy." I said, "You're kidding me." He said, "No." And he pulled out his photograph, and there he was. And he said, "So you're flying PBYs?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Do you have a commercial in them?" I said, "Yeah, sure do. I got one out here at Barbers Point the other day. FAA inspector was out there for something, and I asked him if he would give me a check ride in the PBY, and he'd never been in one, but he said, yeah, he'd do that." So that's another story, I'll tell you that one. But he gave me my rating in the PBY. This captain that I was talking to back there was Sam Elliott. Captain Sam Elliott. He was the first pilot ever hired by Hawaiian Airlines. He was the establishing pilot when they only had one airplane, and they had ordered a Sikorsky S-38 from up in New York. And so anyway, he hired me on the spot. He said, this was in April, and he said, you're hired. And I said, well, I'm still in the Navy. And he said, well, get out. I said, well, Pappy Lee's out there in the Navy. He's depending on me. He said, good. He said, you can fly for him at night, and you come here for ground school and starting May 1st. I said, I won't be able to get out of the Navy that quick. And he said, just go tell Pappy Lees that I said that. He'd never met Pappy Lees, but by golly, it worked. And so I was in the Navy and working for Hawaiian Airlines at the same time for the whole month of May. And not only that, he wanted more Navy guys as pilots. He had Bob McGuire and Duncan and all those guys that he had already hired. They were all from the Air Force, Army Air Corps, as it would call it at that time. So he wanted more naval aviators. And he said, you have any more buddies out at Barbers Point that might like to work for us? And I said, I sure do. And he said, well, go get them. But I went right back out, went to the base, and went up and got those guys, and I said, get in my car. And they said, well, where are we going? I said, you're going to go to work for Hawaiian Airlines. And they said, we're not out of the Navy yet. I said, Captain Sam hired every one of them. But that was the start of the dogs, and the dogs have sure been good to me. I eventually became an all breed judge, but long before that I was judging in foreign countries and judging all breeds, even though maybe I didn't have but 3 or 4 groups or something like that, but there are people there hadn't seen any of these breeds and so forth. And now dogs have taken me to 42 countries in every continent except Antarctica. And the big reason that I retired from Hawaiian Airlines was because of dogs. I retired 5 years early because it was interfering with my dog show judging here and all over the world. And I can blame that on Derek Rain right here in his, haberdashery here. He was the world's greatest dog judge. He was the best in the world at the time that they asked me to judge cockers, and Derek Rain was on the slate. And when we had the dinner at the Chang's house, I think it was, Derek was there, and he asked me, he said, how would you like to come judge for me at the Del Monte show? And I said, that in those days, that was the blue ribbon show on the whole West Coast, And I said, Oh, I'd love to do that, Tacker. He said, what would you charge us? And I said, charge you? What do you mean? You pay judges? I didn't know they paid judges. And he said, yeah. I said, not a cent. I said, I'll walk from here to Monterey to judge your show. Well, of course, and one of the reasons that I got assignments and so forth is because I lived in Hawaii. You know, people all over the mainland say, who is this guy out there? We never heard of him. And that's the reason they wanted him, because they said he doesn't know anybody around here, he doesn't know any of the dogs and so forth, and so maybe he'll do a good job. Between Arthur Zane and Derek Rain, they kept recommending me, and man, you couldn't ask for better advertising. Our first breed was cockers, and we were fond of the particolor cockers, and we first started showing dogs in Pensacola, and had a handler down there that and an advisor was what he was supposed to be for us with cockers. Well, he was handling my dog, and I said, I can do a better job than that. I mean, all you really have to do is stand around and wait till the judge is through, and he points and you say thank you and walk out. And the next breed that we bred was boxers. And we had some good boxers. We had some good cockers too. I don't know how many champions we made. It was hard to make a champion in Hawaii, period. You had one show a year, and so you would have a good boxer and a good bitch. You'd breed them, and maybe a good boxer that you were breeding had 10 points or something like that, and then along would come his son, and his son would start beating him. At one time, I think we had 10 boxers in Hawaii. All of them needed one major, that's all. And none of them ever finished. I end with a gal in New York, Adamson. You remember the Adamson Dobermans? She rewrote the standard on the Dobermans. And I always ask her about some of the things that she said. And one of the things she said in the standard, she said, the ears should be cut normally. And I said to her one day, we were on the same side, I said, what do you mean by normally? And she said, my way. And I said, well, no veterinarian knows what your way is. Why don't you explain it? Well, anyway, but she was a case. But we had some good breeders out there. Yeah, sure do. She just came to me. Her name was Grimesby Dapple Dawn. Grimesby Dapple Dawn. And we had some bad ones. In fact, I won't say the people we bought them from her, but I cashed in an insurance policy that I had to buy this one from these people up in St. Louis, and they sent her down by the train. She came off the train, I opened the crate, and I said, I didn't order that, that's for sure. But we were stuck with her, we'd already paid her, and they weren't taking her back. But eventually, I was flying the Admiral's airplane by that time at Pensacola. That's another story, but Admiral Whitney. I told him one day, I said, Admiral, there's a good litter that's just been, just 8 weeks old. I'd seen it in the magazine, Cocker's College magazine. And the Grimes were good breeders. And so I called them and I said, you haven't sold all that litter, have you? And they said, no, we still have all of them, but we've promised them to different people and so forth. I said, have you got a good bitch? And they said, yeah, we do. And I said, well, I'll be up tomorrow to get one. And I told him, I said, I've got the cash. You won't have to give you a check, anything. I'll just give you cash for it. I said, I'll land at such and such an airport and I'll rent a car. And they said, never mind, we'll come pick you up. So it was Spartanburg, I think, was where it was. Anyway, I went up there, landed, pulled up to the thing. They came, picked me up, we went out to their house. And so I'm looking at them. They're, like I say, they're 8 or 9 weeks old, somewhere along in there. That's where we always pick cockers and most of the other breeds. But anyway, I said, how about that one right there? Can I have that one right there? And they said, no. It said, we promised that one to Norman Austin. He got here yesterday, and he was working for B. Wagerson at the time. They had the Honey Creek cockers, that I've got a picture of it down there. But I said, damn, as far as I'm concerned, that's the best one. And so I looked around for a little boy, and I said, how about that one? They said, yeah, you can have her. And I said, have you registered her? And he said, oh yeah, we always register them because keep our names and we know where the dogs we're going and so forth. And I said, well, what's her name? And she said, he said, Grimsby Dapple Dawn. And I said, Dawn? And she knew her name already. And she looked at me and I grabbed her. I said, baby, this is your daddy now. So took her home and raised her. She was the first one that we ever got a decent puppy from. And we bred her, maybe twice. And then we were leaving Pensacola and coming back to Hawaii. And by this time I was writing articles for Cocker's College, covering a show or somewhere for them and so on and forth. And all the people in Hawaii were Cocker people, all had the magazine, you know. And so by the time we got back to Hawaii, we came out on the Lurleen, not the Lurleen, but a Navy transport. And they knew what transport we were coming in on. You know, the Royal Hawaiian Band is down there playing when the ship comes in. I look down, and there were all the Cocker people. and of course the dog couldn't go, she had to go directly to quarantine. And so the guys were there to pick her up. Off she went. And we raised our first litter in quarantine. And people were always bitching about that because they couldn't get a dog bred properly and get it through quarantine. Well, Marilyn and I never had any trouble whatsoever because we'd go down there and the boys cleaned up after our dogs, the whole litter and the mother. When we had to separate the mother from her puppies, she went into another kennel away from the dogs where they couldn't see her, and puppies, and we raised a litter down there. I don't know how many there were in the litter, not many, but they were good. there are other funny stories about showing dogs or being a dog club. One of the places that we had a show was in Harry Turner's garage. He was the Chevrolet dealer in town, and he had a showroom and in the maintenance part back there, and there was room enough for dog shows in those days. I don't know how many we had, but it wasn't so we would put Marilyn at the door where we had the spectators coming in, and you charge the spectator 25 cents to come in, and we have a catalog here, and if they want a catalog, you sell them a catalog for $1, I think it was, and otherwise nobody can come in unless they paid, or if they have a ticket that says they are entered, and one of their dogs is entered or something like that. You've got to have either a dog or a ticket or in this. And so time to start the show, and we looked out, and here was Marilyn talking to this gentleman, and finally Tuck went out there and he said, hi, Mr. Duncan, what's the problem here? We should have started about 15 minutes ago. And he said, well, this lady won't let me in. And Marilyn says, you can't come in. But he says, but I'm the judge. She said, I don't care. They told me you can't come in. And so it was J.J. Duncan. I don't know whether you remember him or not, but he was the nicest old Scotsman that ever lived, and he would not have argued with her at all. He would just talking with her, you know, and asking her where she was from and all about it, and how many kids she had. This lady gave me my first English setter, and the English setter was a famous one, a bitch that had been bred by a guy down here in Los Angeles and shipped out to Hawaii after she finished her championship, and shipped out to this lady in Maui, Oahu, for a dog show. And then when she got off the airplane in Maui, when she was going home, I always got out of my airplane and went down with the passengers. I'd say goodbye to the passengers and go out to the baggage ramp with them. And so, and I saw this dog. I said, wow, what a beautiful dog. She said, what do you know about dogs? And I said, well, you know, I told her we had bred them, and I'd start judging, and I said, I'm a judge. And she said, you have English setters? And I said, no. She said, would you like this one? She gave it to me. But it was all fun.